Hey up, it's Farmer Phil here of He Farms, and this is the second part of our wee mini-series on why we do what we do. And if you haven't seen the first part, I suggest you follow the link here to watch that for some context. And now today we're talking about why mobbing animals up together, moving them frequently and giving the pasture a long recovery period is so beneficial to the land and the environment. Now this is a topic that really gets me excited, so I'm going to try and not get carried away and go off on a complete tangent, but do forgive me in advance if I do. And so, like most things on the farm, how we manage livestock is heavily influenced by nature. And what we're trying to do is replicate nature in a way that herbivores would have acted on a landscape without too much human involvement. And that is, you see in places like the Serengeti with the large game animals of Africa, or along the Great Plains of America where you have these big herd of buffalo roaming along. These herbivores tend to move almost continuously, stopping very infrequently, and when they do, they've constantly got predator pressure on them, which is encouraging them to move on, and really, and very rarely, not return to those pastures within the same grazing season. And so that's what we're aiming to replicate, but on a much smaller scale, and using this temporary electric fence instead of wolves, lions and tigers. And so what this high animal impact does to the land is that it forces some non-selective grazing behaviour with the livestock. They feel like they're competing with one another a wee bit, and so they end up eating not just the most palatable species amongst the pasture, but also the ones that are a bit less palatable to them, but nonetheless very good for them. Kind of like getting your kids to eat broccoli. And that, along with the high impact trampling effect that they have as they're searching around very quickly going for food, helps to trample the dying and dead material back onto the soil surface, where the little critters and the biology in and on the soil surface can help break that down. So this clearing of the smorgasbord really provides an ideal environment to enable the germination of seeds that are already available in the soil seed bank. And so what returns is generally a much more diverse and dense sward of pasture. But because we're leaving it such a long time for the animals to come back to that same spot and graze, those newly emerged plants have a long time to establish and express themselves fully. This means that those plants become more adapted and more resilient with each grazing cycle, creating just a more resilient land base. So the material that isn't eaten and trampled creates a mulch layer across the pasture, kind of like what putting a mulch on your veg garden would do. It helps protect the soil from excesses of heat, intense rain and wind erosion. And so all this helps to improve water quality because we're not getting the runoff, and it also improves air quality because we're not getting bare soil that dries out and dust blowing away. And ultimately, what we're talking about here with this management strategy is that we're building soil from above and below ground. We're taking carbon out of the atmosphere and sequestering it within the soil in its most stable form, and we're also increasing the organic matter level of the soil. And as an example, that soil organic matter, for every 1% increase in that, the land has the capacity to hold 80,000 litres more water per hectare, so just a phenomenal amount. And what that ends up doing is meaning that nutrient leaching becomes less of an issue because the land's able to hold and absorb any excesses. And it also means any dry periods, the grass growth is prolonged through that period because there's moisture there in the soil that the plants can access. This means that photosynthesis occurs for a much longer period, and just creating this exponential effect of returning more and more CO2 from the atmosphere and locking it up within the soil. And by keeping the animals mobbed up and constantly moving and using this temporary electric fence, we get a much more even spread of manure and urine across the landscape. This is because the animals just don't have the opportunity to go congregate underneath their favourite tree and then deposit what they do on the land, and generally, like anything, too much of anything is not necessarily a good thing. And so that reduces again the impact for leaching and nutrient runoff. but also because we've got this manure and urine spread so evenly, we have no need to add any chemical fertilisers or even organic fertilisers for that matter at this stage. And we've never used herbicides or pesticides and certainly don't intend to. So to give you an example of the broader environmental benefits of not using chemical fertilisers, the amount of nitrogen fertiliser that's used on 1 hectare of corn or maize crop requires the use of approximately 30,000 litres of natural gas in the production and distribution of that fertiliser. So just a phenomenal, intense energy consumption, just to help crops grow a bit better. And so we have no need for that. And likewise, if this was just a monoculture pasture, which is seen throughout New Zealand commonly, we also don't need any pesticides or herbicides to help prop the system up. And because of that, we see biodiversity flourishing here on our farm. And I think you would anywhere where you introduce these management strategies, because really the more soil, the more life there is below the soil, the more life can be supported above the soil. And so what we're seeing here is dragonflies and native frogs returning. We're seeing abundance of birds coming back year after year at all levels of their food chain. We've had a population explosion of skinks, the little native lizard that lives around these parts. And we also have deer coming through frequently. Now this property just hums with life now, but it wouldn't have been that if we weren't managing the land in the way that we are. These simple management strategies can have a dramatic effect on the local and broader environment. We're seeing improved water quality, an improved water cycle, improved air quality. We're sequestering carbon within the soil, taking that CO2 out of the atmosphere and putting where it belongs. And we're also seeing just this explosion of biodiversity. And these are the things that can all occur just through very simple actions when you start looking and taking cues from nature. So I hope this video has given you a wee bit of an insight of some of the positive environmental impacts that this kind of management can have. And if you've got any questions, do feel free to put them in some comments or get in touch, because yeah, this is a topic that really does excite me and I'm deeply passionate about. And so stay tuned for part 3, which is coming up tomorrow, about why this system is so beneficial to these critters behind me, the livestock. And I'm really looking forward to talking about that too. And just remember, you can subscribe to the channel, share and spread the word. Everybody's support is much appreciated. And we'll catch you next time. Ciao!